My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victim's advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. I'm Bill Thomas.
And I'm Kristin Dilley. And today we are joined by retired supervisory special agent and profiler Jim Clemente. Jim, welcome to Mind Over Murder.
Thank you, and I'm really happy to be here. I really appreciate you, Bill and Kristin, for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And we can tell, it's early for you. It's a Sunday morning. You were working late last night. We'll impose on you as much as your energy level will allow.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, this whole COVID thing has flipped everything on its head. So we're having to pivot.
Well, and not only are you working from home, you're working even harder than ever.
Mm-hmm. That's not an understatement.
For the benefit of our listeners, we both know you and have known you for a number of years. Tell us a little bit about your background, Jim.
Well, I got a degree in chemistry and philosophy from Fordham. Then I went to Fordham Law School, and I became a prosecutor in New York, and an FBI agent, and then an FBI profiler. After I retired from the Bureau, I became a writer-producer in Hollywood. And that's a pretty good thumbnail of my career.
So what made you decide to join the FBI after working as a prosecutor in New York City?
Well, I think when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a detective, but I knew I was going to college, and then I ended up going to law school and became a prosecutor. And I don't know, it just seemed like I wanted to become a cop. It would sort of be going backwards. But then I met this FBI agent who explained to me that FBI agents are actually federal detectives, and that I could actually use my law degree and my skills from being a prosecutor in the FBI. And that was incredibly enticing to me. So I ended up going for it. And 22 years went by in a flash. It was pretty amazing.
This interest in the detective work, Jim, are we talking about all the way back to when you were a kid, reading
Yes.
comic books and watching TV, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I never read comic books, though, because I was dyslexic and I would get migraine headaches reading comic books. Something about all the noise of the pictures and reading the words, trying to read the words, trying to concentrate so the words didn't swim all over the place was very, very difficult for me. So I did not read comic books. I do not believe I have ever read an entire comic book in my life. And it was a long time before I could read a novel on my own, actually, which is why I focused on chemistry and math in college, because it was easier. The numbers didn't move around, but the words did and the letters did. So, yeah, when I was a kid, I was trying to figure things out. I read all the Hardy Boy mysteries and then Sherlock Holmes, and I thought it was amazing how you could use your brain and science to figure things out that, were sort of hidden clues, and then put it all together with logic and actually solve major crimes. So I just thought that was a really interesting way to use your brain.
I was smiling when you mentioned the Hardy Boys because those were huge when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
They segued us into, like you say, Sherlock Holmes and more sophisticated mysteries. So did that interest in figuring things out inspire you when this FBI agent talked to you about you could use this law degree and all this experience that you have and still work as that boy detective that you thought about when you were a kid?
Yeah, when I had never thought of FBI agents as federal detectives. I thought of them as sort of just these unattainable, high-level, super spies or something like that. I don't know. And I didn't really focus on the fact that they were involved in criminal investigations. I knew that they, stopped bad people from being gangsters and, in the old gangland cases, and I knew that they stopped people from stealing secrets or attacking the United States. I didn't realize the extent to which they actually investigated very complicated and interstate criminal cases. It eventually gave me the opportunity to do a lot of things I never thought I would do in my life.
How many years did you work as a prosecutor before that?
I was in the prosecutor's office for 5 years, and then 3 or 4 years into it, I applied. It takes about a year to get into the bureau. The application process is long and difficult.
So what were some of the skills that you had as a prosecutor that you found were of particular benefit to you as a profiler?
Well, I mean, the thing that a prosecutor does that I don't know if any other job actually has this same aspect is having to figure out a way to be under complete and total stress, yet think on your feet and present as if you're totally calm, cool, and collected, and put together cogent arguments and put together lines of questioning that have to appear to be a carefully woven mosaic, but they literally are, sort of, you're flying blind in a lot of these cases, and a lot of what we had to do, literally juggling hundreds of cases in our caseload. It just makes you sort of calm down under fire, as opposed to being all hyper and all over the place. So that was something that helped me. But I think what helped me more was the fact that I had a real interest in people and diversity and all the different aspects of human life and behavior. And when I was struggling through law school, I worked my way through law school. I went at night and didn't have much money and had even less time. But I lived pretty close to Times Square, and I would go down to Times Square, Friday or Saturday night, with a milk crate and sit on the sidewalk on a corner and watch people go by. Now they have tables and chairs and benches and all that kind of stuff for people to do that. But back then, it was just a madhouse in Times Square. And, there was all sorts of craziness going on and debauchery. It was just like a circus to me, and it was free entertainment. The entertainment was me, listening to and watching people, and I'd only get a snippet of their life, but I would try to figure out who they were and where they were from and what was their story. And that inadvertently trained me incredibly well for being a profiler.
When you would go down to Times Square and sit there and watch and listen, were you thinking, I'm doing this as part of developing a skill set that I'm going to use as an FBI agent?
Absolutely not. I did it for entertainment. It was interesting. It was, the melting pot of New York right in front of my eyes. And so I wanted to study people, and that's what I did.
Now, I moved to New York in 1990, and even in 1990, Times Square was still pretty sketchy. People don't understand just how seedy it was. But this is before then, isn't it? There was a drug dealing and prostitution and who knows what going on.
That's right, yeah. This would have been 1981, 82, 83, 84. Yeah, it was pretty horrible there before Rudy Giuliani kind of kicked out all the porn shops and the burlesque shows and the strip joints and made it family friendly.
And this was in an era when you must have seen a fair amount of police activity, because, there was some effort to try to make arrests, weren't there?
Yeah, I guess. But, generally that whole district, it was just hell. And it was right next to Hell's Kitchen, and it was hell.
Yeah, the real estate people later renamed Hell's Kitchen Clinton because no yuppie wanted to move to Hell's Kitchen.
It's very popular now.
So it sounds like even before going to Quantico to embark on all of the training that you would do to become an FBI agent, it sounds like you had already sort of trained yourself a fair amount in watching people and learning to make judgments and so on and so forth about people's lives. That's really, really interesting.
Well, when they pick people for the behavioral analysis unit, they're looking for people who have some kind of people experience. It's not just the cases you worked and the law enforcement agencies that you liaised with. they're also looking for people with different perspectives and different backgrounds and curiosities and the ability to, interact with all kinds of people. And so it's one of the things they look for because it's a skill that helps you do a better job as a profiler.
Now, when you headed to Quantico after being accepted into the FBI after the whole long application process and so on, was joining the BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, part of your plan? Is that what you were thinking about?
I didn't know about it until I was in the FBI Academy, and we had two different profilers come and talk to us and teach us behavioral science. One of them was John Douglas, legendary profile, and one was a lesser known profiler, but just as credible, Pete Smerick. And they came in, and I think John Douglas lectured to us about the Unabomber investigation, which was in its, I guess, in the middle of its, terror, because I went through in 1987, and that's, when he started bombing. And it's just a terrible thing when people are getting blown up and losing body parts and losing their lives. So it's something that particular case kind of paralleled my and Jim Fitzgerald's careers in the FBI. And then Pete Smerick came in and told us about a serial killer who was working the East Coast named James DeBartolome. And it was a very disturbing case, a sexual sadist who raped and killed a lot of women. And he was a genius, and Pete Smerick told us how they basically used their brains to figure out from sort of the path of destruction that this guy left in his wake, figure out who he was and, how to get him. It was really fascinating. And after Pete Smerick's lecture to us, I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, I think it's amazing what you do, and I really want to do the same thing." And he's like, "Yeah, kid, go get 10 years of experience and then come back to me." And at my retirement, he stood up and said, many people said that to me. Many people wanted to get into the unit, but you were the first that I told what to do. You did it, and you came back to us. It's actually 9 years and 8 months later that I was in the Behavioral Analysis Unit.
So people don't join the BAU from the beginning of their FBI career. They go out and get a significant amount of experience before they sort of move into the BAU.
Absolutely. Because, well, first of all, when I was in it, they had 25 agents out of 14,000 FBI agents. So it's a very competitive position. You can't just walk into it. No matter what your background is, you need a good decade of experience working major cases, working detailed, complicated investigations, working violent crimes, working with locals. There's a lot of stuff you have to do before you'll qualify to get in.
So you mentioned Jim Fitzgerald already, who is a friend of the podcast. We've loved having him on. Can you talk about meeting Fitz? How did you guys become friends with each other?
He was sitting to the right of me, and he was one of the most senior guys in the class, and I was one of the youngest guys in the class. He had been a cop before, so he had some experience that I didn't have. I had been a prosecutor, so he had less experience in the legal area. So we were sitting next to each other. We kind of bonded because of that and because of our differences that were sort of complementary. And another thing was that it would be foreboding, but we kind of both felt like we weren't overly challenged by the coursework. We had both gotten advanced degrees, and we thought that the level that they were teaching at was, sort of not that difficult for us, at least the classroom instruction. And so it was something that we kind of got a little bored about, and we ended up doing something together that ended up being really a team building, bonding experience for the whole class. We were talking at one point where Fitz had just gotten a video camera And when I say video camera, it's like at that time they were as big as a boombox almost. And I had a CD of all the themes of all the TV shows from like the 50s through the 70s or the 80s, the beginning of the 80s. And so I said, you know what? We should do a movie spoofing our experience at the academy. And so we spent a lot of nights, like 3 a.m. we would get up, we would wake people up, we would shoot these scenes, so that it didn't mess up our day.
Right.
But I mean, eventually we actually got some of our instructors involved, but we mocked every one of our instructors, and it was a little rude, but at the same time, what it ended up being, so the night before our graduation, we played it for everybody at this party, and then our staff counselor came in. He's the guy who ran our class. He was our leader. Right. And he was a tough guy. I mean, Eddie Morales, who was a hero of the Miami FBI shootout. And, 2 agents were killed and other agents were injured. He was badly injured. I mean, critically injured, but he still was able to get up and stop them from killing another agent. And he was, physically, he was pretty shot up. I mean, he lost 2 inches of one of his arms from a shotgun blast or a high-powered rifle blast, and all sorts of, difficulties as a result of that. And he took it out on us. He was like going to tell us. He was going to teach us. Yeah. I'm not laughing. I'm serious. Yeah. He was going to teach us that this is a life or death job. This is not funny or for the faint of heart. So he put us through hell. And in that process, there was a little bit of contention, and we kind of took it out on him in this video. So when he walks into the party, when this video is on, and sits right in front of the TV that it was playing on, and starts it from the beginning, we thought, holy shit, we're going to lose our jobs. This is it. This is it. And by the end of the production, he had tears in his eyes. He was laughing so hard. He loved it. And you know what? He said, I'm going to make a copy of this for each of you guys. And what we didn't know is he made a copy for himself, and he kept it. And they would use it on later classes to teach them about team building. Oh, wow. And we had done this whole thing.
Right,
we did
on your
Keystone
own.
Cops episodes. We did moot court episodes. We did arrest procedures. We did surveillance. We did all sorts of crazy stuff.
Right, but with a comedic edge to it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It turned out like I remember one time we were in the New York office together, because Fitz and I also were assigned to the same division and the same actual squad in the FBI New York office. And we were working together, and one day we were waiting for the elevators and on the first floor of 26 Federal Plaza in New York, where the FBI was. And a young female agent came up to us and said, I know you guys. You guys are the ones from the movie. And we're like, what are you talking about? The team building movie that they show at the FBI Academy. And we're like, what? And she let us know that they show that to the classes to show how people, can work together and form a team. Another thing that happened while I was in the academy was we had Mr. Rogers as our PT instructor. And Mr. Rogers was not the same guy as on the TV show. He was a former Marine.
Oh, I knew he was going to be a Marine for sure.
Gung-ho, just super rock solid built guy who was drill sergeant trained, right? And that's how he treated us. One day, I guess it was probably a blizzard outside, so we couldn't go out. But don't get me wrong, we did go out in other blizzards. But anyway, he said, all right, everybody, start warming up, 2 laps around the gym. So he goes, I'll be back. Looks at his watch. He walks away. So we start doing laps. 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, 40 minutes go by, an hour and 20 goes by, and we're still, quote, warming up, doing laps. And I realized at some point that this was a test, and this was, sort of something that was going to keep going, and I was bored. So I started making up sort of a march I can't remember what they're called. Do you remember what they're called when I want to be an Air Force Ranger? I want to, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I come from a Navy family, but I never served. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's like a song that you do, a march song, basically. So I got people to step in time in our jog. And I started, I want to be an FBI. I want to be an FBI man. I want to go to Quantico. I want to live a life of danger. Dress me up, and here I go. So I started that one, and then other people chimed in. And so by the time 2 hours had elapsed and Mr. Rogers came back, we were all marching, jog marching in unison.
Chanting
an entire song. And, when he came back, we all shut up, right? And he was like, no, keep going. So we did it. And he listened to the whole thing and he said, all right, good job, we're done. And that was it, And
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. Many of you know that Othram is leading the way in DNA testing, helping law enforcement solve missing persons, homicides, and sexual assault cases across the United States and Canada using forensic-grade DNA tests.
You can help this important cause by contributing funds and your DNA profile to Othram's free site, DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps.
Now DNA Solves has added another new feature, DNA Solves Connect, which will allow you to upload your DNA profile to help law enforcement, even if you've never used one of the commercial genealogy sites.
If you're looking for a missing family member or have lost touch with someone, DNA Solves Connect is an incredible option at only $14.95.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com.
Join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
The third thing that I did, I guess, through the academy was that we had a bulletin board, and you're supposed to post important things on our floor where we lived in the dorm. You're supposed to post important messages. I don't know, there was a cartoon that came out that had some relevance. I can't remember what exactly it was, but I changed the little word bubbles in it to make it more relevant, and I posted it up on our bulletin board. And, a couple of days later, there's another one, and I would do more. And anyway, we pretty much filled that whole thing. And so by the end of the class, I thought, we should preserve this. And I said, why don't I make a yearbook for us? And so I start putting together this whole yearbook thing, right? And then like really close to the end, when we're doing our finals, one of our field counselors, those are sort of under our staff counselor, there's 2 field counselors that are senior agents that come back to help train new agents. Anyway, one of them comes up to me and says, I understand you're doing a yearbook. And I was like, oh, here we go again. I'm going to get fired again.
Boy, they had your number by this point.
They did. And I said, yeah, but it's just, kind of a lighthearted thing. And they go, okay, well, here, you can have this pass and you can go and make copies and get it bound and all this stuff at the office.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh,
wow.
So anyway, I put it together and it was a bunch of, cutouts and
little photo montage.
Yeah, photo montage,
yeah. And, there was photo montages. There's Ronald Reagan cheering us on, and there's all these cartoons. And then we took our class photos and we made, sort of hysterical, here they are now 20 years later, and, crazy things. And, and then the last thing I put in it was that march song that we had done at the end, of that exercise. It was kind of cool. And they pointed to our class as an example of excellent team building. And what they probably didn't know was that it was just, I was bored and Fitz was bored and we started this whole thing. So my brother would go through the academy 4 years later. And when he got bored, they would do crazy things. So they got into a lot of trouble, but luckily I was around to help them get out. But that's for a whole other thing.
I'm sure that the higher ups had to have noticed the 2 of you and Fitz, and it wasn't that you were troublemakers, like you were saying about a later class or something like that. When I was listening to you talk about, those big clunky camcorders, I remember those very well, and you're having the CD with the theme music from the TV shows and starting to make this little movie, if you will. I was thinking, no wonder you ended up going into film and TV. I mean, you've been making movies, as far back as the Academy. This is crazy. They had to have noticed, these two, they've got something that's a little different than the average FBI agent.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, their first response when they do notice somebody who's different is danger, because Hoover wanted everybody to be, a cog, and everybody's interchangeable.
Right.
And the number one rule in the FBI is don't embarrass the bureau. So we kind of embarrassed the bureau, and we thought we were going to get fired, but somehow they liked it, so we stayed.
Well, so a certain dollop of irreverence and creativity went a long way.
I suppose.
Somehow I'm not surprised you ended up making movies and television shows, Jim.
No, me either. Wow, that's amazing. What are the types of courses that you actually took at Quantico beyond behavioral science that are used to train agents?
Well, if you're talking about in the BAU, there's a 480-hour course that you take once you get into the unit.
Oh my God, 480 hours.
Profilers there are. I think I was probably in a class of about 6. They all go through this training, and it is comprehensive, and every agent who's already in the BAU has to teach a class, and every agent who comes into the BAU has to come in with an expertise that they can teach as well. And so all of the agents, who aren't out working cases usually sit in on these classes. It's mainly for whoever the new class of profilers is. And like Dr. Park Dietz came in and taught us abnormal psychology. He's a forensic psychiatrist and forensic psychologist from Johns Hopkins. He works out of Newport Beach, and he's well known for some amazing cases that he worked. Like, he's the one that did the interview of the Iceman. See that on YouTube, I'm sure. And then Dr. Robert Hare came to teach us psychopathy. He's the one that developed the psychopathy checklist and the psychopathy checklist revised, PCLR. Dr. Callum Shan came from Scotland to teach us neurolinguistic programming, how our memories work. So we had all of these world-renowned experts come in and teach us basically one-on-one, as opposed to sort of going to a class or going to a school somewhere, which there was no doctoral programs in these subjects available in the United States of America or anywhere around the world for that matter at this time. And it has profound effect on you when you have these really just world-class experts come in and teach you these things. So it was fascinating, and it was just, it just really confirmed in my mind that this is the most amazing way to use your brain.
So speaking of film and TV, you ended up working years later as a writer, producer, and a consultant, I guess, on Criminal Minds, which is a show that was extremely well written, and I know used a lot of your background as an FBI agent. What do you feel that Hollywood doesn't do well in terms of your real life experience as an FBI agent and profiler versus someone who helped create television from an entertainment perspective?
Well, I guess the first thing is that Criminal Minds, the profilers fly around in a G5 and drink whiskey while they're doing it.
Yes.
That's 100% bullshit. We float coach, and you can't drink while you're on a plane because you're on duty. You are armed, and you are law enforcement whenever you're flying in the United States. So that's one of the big things. The other thing is that obviously they crunch time in the episodes and solve everything in 43 minutes. So that doesn't happen. But the other thing is that the profiling room, and they depicted it on Criminal Minds as a round table, which was deliberate on Ed Bernero's part. Like, that he saw these profilers as the Knights of the Round Table, and they, sort of banded together to help stomp out evil in his mind. So that was a good analogy, but the way it worked on TV was that basically the profilers all were of one mind. And although some of them had different expertise in different areas, in the very early episodes, basically ABC and CBS eventually made it so that they were all finishing each other's sentences, that they all knew exactly what the other one knew, and there were no real distinguishing characteristics. And that's not accurate. What's accurate is every single one of us in the profiling unit has our own history and education and experience and perspective. And all of those things are critically important to actually being a profiler. And the group consciousness that develops when you actually argue through things versus finishing each other's sentences is actually a much better product. You have to understand that by challenging each other, we challenge our own beliefs and our own understanding. And if you can convince others of your position, and it's difficult, then perhaps that is the right position. So if you can't, then that goes by the wayside. And so it's a real sort of knockdown, drag out process. But I had the benefit of, one, being a former prosecutor, and two, being a New Yorker. So I'm used to arguing.
I didn't reference this before, but I actually think your experience as a prosecutor would have a great deal of bearing on your success as an FBI agent and a profiler, because you knew what a prosecutor would ultimately need to succeed in prosecuting a case. In other words, it
Absolutely.
isn't just a matter of identifying a bad guy and putting him or her away. There's a lot of steps, but you understood all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely helped. And it's one of the things where, they can't, in the legal courses in Quantico, they teach you a certain level of constitutional law and investigations, but they can't teach you anywhere near what you learn in law school in 3 solid years, or 4 years if you go at night, or as a prosecutor when you're doing 200 cases at a time. There are plenty of people who go through the FBI that aren't lawyers, but about 20% are. And of those, maybe, 10%, 15% are probably former prosecutors. So it's a real small number of people that have that level of experience. And so I felt lucky, and I could also feel a lot more confident in the calls that I made in the field in the course of investigation, that they would help the prosecution and prevent issues that could hamper the prosecution.
Let's jump back to Criminal Minds for a second. The thing you mentioned a moment ago, I'm kind of baffled by this. I actually think hearing super smart people like profilers debate their perspectives on a particular case or a potential suspect or what have you would have made for really interesting television. I mean, were there times when you wanted to say to the producers, and I know you ultimately became a producer, wait a minute, that's not how we did it at Quantico. We mixed it up. We argued these points.
Wanted to say? I said it every week in that damn room for 15 seasons. So, yeah, it's just the network and the studio decided that they wanted these heroes to all be sort of on an equal level and to not have any contention. And it was one of the unrealistic things that the show depicted. Not in a bad way, not for bad ends. It's just something that they decided as they're shaping the show. That's what they wanted. But we made it work pretty well. We became the 7th longest running primetime drama in the history of TV. So that was pretty cool.
So for every episode that you wrote of Criminal Minds, and I know you wrote a number of them, were they all based on a case that you worked or an experience that you had? Is that where you drew all your inspiration from?
Well, every episode of Criminal Minds has some tie to real cases. I tried to, even if a writer came up with some bizarre way out idea for an episode or a series of episodes, I would pull it back to reality by folding in aspects of real cases. So, yeah, every episode that's out there has some of me in it, and that not only me doing a cameo in the ones I wrote, but has my sort of influence on it so that it's not just ridiculousness. And I think that's one of the reasons why the show lasted so long, because writers, great as they are, I mean, and they're very talented writers on Criminal Minds. They don't have a lot of life experience in the same way that an FBI agent would. And certainly when you're talking about an FBI profiler, they're experienced law enforcement agents who have seen the worst of the worst and have done a tremendous amount of work to get into the unit. And then once you get in the unit, it just blows your mind how much you do. So they can't know, and that's why they have tech advisors, which is how I started. And then season 2, I became a freelance writer. And then after I retired, after season 5, I came on full time and became a writer-producer.
How many writers would be on a show like Criminal Minds when you were working there?
Generally about 8, because we're doing 22 to 24 episodes a season. We have, at any given time, we had one show in prep, one show shooting, and one show in post. So that's 3 writers, 3 sets of producers, 3 directors, 3 editors, all working at the same time. And that leaves 5 to actually be coming up with the next episode and the next episode and the next episode. So it's sort of a rotational system, and it keeps churning out a new episode every week when it takes more than a week to actually shoot it. So even though we're putting out an episode every week, we actually shoot for 8 days. So that's 5 days one week and 3 days another week. So a week and a half is taken up by every episode in terms of shooting it. And then, of course, there's all the prep you have to do, which is usually another week and a half. And then there's also all the post you have to do, all the editing and all the music and the sound design and the lighting. It's a lot of work. That's how you do a major network production.
How much of the writing actually takes place with more than one writer in the room at a time? Is there a writer's room?
There is a writer's room, yes. And that's where everybody sits down.
Yeah, you were saying there is a writer's room, and you were talking about the process.
Yeah. So the writer's room is basically a sanctuary. And on a show, the writer's room is closed. In other words, the doors are closed. And this is deliberate because in a writer's room, you have to be able to talk about anything, especially on a show like Criminal Minds. You're going to be talking about really serious crimes, incredibly difficult subjects, very disturbing ideas. And this could be traumatic to somebody who's just working in the office. So they literally close the doors. And what happens in the writer's room has to stay in the writer's room. And not only for, copyright purposes, but because if it doesn't, then you could get people, secondarily traumatized just by hearing what we're talking about these cases. Because as much as people say Criminal Minds is very disturbing, graphic, it isn't that graphic, actually. We suggest a lot of graphic stuff.
Right.
We don't actually show you it. We explain a lot of disturbing stuff, but you don't actually see it. And so that suggestion actually makes it more horrifying because your imagination is worse than whatever we could put on TV. You have to agree if you come into a writer's room that this is going to be the world you're in. And some people don't make it. Some people say, I can't do this, and they leave. So in the writer's room, we pitch our ideas for episodes. In the first several seasons, they came almost exclusively from me lecturing to the writers about what I did. And little did I know that I was giving away millions of dollars worth of stories.
The intellectual property in your head.
Not a joke.
Yeah.
And so they would pick and choose from the stories I told them. And those are the episodes that you saw on Criminal Minds, the first few seasons. Eventually, they would kind of get the idea and start making up their own. And I would be responsible for bringing them back to reality. So you pitched the stories, you'd write up a paragraph, the studio and network approved it, and then we break the stories one at a time. We put them up on a board, we break it down into a teaser and 4 acts. At one point at the beginning, it was a teaser and 6 acts, but because the show was doing so well, they could limit the number of commercials, and that meant that you could cut the number of acts down, and it made it a lot easier. We were such a well-oiled machine that they'd let us do it on our own. I mean, they literally did not bother us much at all in terms of, affecting what we did. They gave us some good notes, and they gave us direction at times, and that was always a great process. But for the most part, they let the writer's room write and create. That was great. So you break the episode, and then, with the whole group there, and you present what you think the story is, and then, hey, They help saying, oh, let's add this or take that away or do this. What about that? And then we put it all up on the board. And then once that's broken, you get a week to write an outline. And then you get notes on that. You do edits on the outline. And then you get 2 weeks to write the script. And then that's the first draft. And by the time that's over, the first draft you're going to do is in white. And then every draft after that has a different color. So it might go white, blue, pink, green, yellow, and then goldenrod. And then it would start all over again. White 2, blue 2, pink 2. And so by the time it's shot, there could be 8, 10 different drafts of that episode. And some of the changes are done for any number of reasons. One might be that, well, it's raining out, so we can't do that big outside scene. We spent too much on last episode, so we can't do that explosion of a warehouse. It's going to be a double wide, that kind of thing. So all those kinds of practical things go in, but also creative things. And when the director gets involved, they might want something changed. And the network and the studio and the producers and the set design, they all can weigh in. Look, we can't get to prison this week. You're going to have to do it in a school because we can get that to shoot in, that kind of thing. And so there's all sorts of different considerations that lead to changes. And then the writer has to be on set when they shoot it because there are changes that are happening as the scenes are being shot. And the writer has to make sure that if an actor says, I really feel like I should be saying this instead. And sometimes you say, that's great, but it doesn't mean what you think it does. For example, in one episode, the actors thought that the word psychopathy was being used a little bit too much. So they decided to switch it for psychosis. So they would say psychosis and psychopathy interchangeably. And those are very, 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 very extremely different concepts, but they didn't know that.
Right.
And if the writer on set doesn't know that, then you end up getting word soup. And, it happens on a lot of other shows. I can tell you that. So anyway, that's the process. And it's a very comprehensive and illuminating process. We had great leaders. From Ed Bernero, and then Erica Messer took over. And it ran for so long in such a, wonderful way that it was a great show. And we were a great tight-knit family and we loved working together. When the actors are getting it wrong, for instance, with using the wrong terminology or whatever, obviously, you're in your mind, you got to be thinking, you want to be shouting out, no, stop. Do you turn to the director when the scene is finished or whatever and say, that's wrong, here's what's going on? Yeah, there's protocols, and that is the protocol. And, for most productions, so the tech advisor and or writer would talk to the script supervisor who is on set, and she or he is the one that has to make sure that everything is going according to the script. Right. And if somebody says a line wrong, she's supposed to speak up, and the writer's there to tell her if she doesn't catch it or he doesn't catch it. And then the script supervisor will usually say, I'll go tell the director, or I'll go tell the actor, or they'll say, could you explain that to them because I don't get it, whatever. There's a hierarchy that you start with. Of course, over time, people understand. And especially in my case, when I wrote an episode, people would just come to me, and sometimes the directors got pissed because hell, they didn't want me talking to actors directly. Yeah. But all of the regular actors would come to me all the time and ask me questions, and a bunch of the guest stars and so forth would as well. But, I tried to be as good as I could in terms of, going through the director, and, some directors would just say, go for it. You know exactly how they should do it and how they should say it. So go for it. Right. So it just depends. That's all. I really appreciate you having me. This was fun. Well, thank you. We'd love to do a second episode. You just let us know when works for you from a schedule perspective. Okay.
And that's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time. Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.